This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Persephone and Cassandra, Atlas and Prometheus, oligarchy, plutocracy, satire, irony, hubris, nemesis, pathos, catharsis, sour grapes and blowing hot and cold, opening Pandora's box and leaving no stone unturned, the myths, tales and concepts of ancient Greece echo and reach into every aspect of modern life. Often misunderstood, frequently romanticized, and sometimes deliberately twisted. To understand their origins and truth is to get a real glimpse into the universal themes that connect us to the past and to each other. This is their story.
Άμα θέλεις μάνα, δίρε με, άμα θέλεις μάνα, δίρε με, πάλι εγώ θα βγαίνω στην αυλή για να βλέπω τον Αλεξανδρή.
Welcome to Podyssey. I'm Alex Andreou. Each week we will take one myth, one concept, person, place or theme from ancient Greece, take it apart, figure out its inner workings, trace its influence, juice it for its wisdom, reimagine, update, and put it back together, shiny and new. Imagine being so in love that you cannot take your eyes off the object of your affection, that they're not instantly reading your message plunges you into despair, that you spend hours tracing every nook and outline of their face with your fingers, memorizing every feature, that you sleep on their pillow if they're away, that being parted is painful, that desire makes your skin burn. Or maybe you don't have to imagine it, just remember it. Most of what you think you know about the story of Narcissus is wrong. This isn't a story of conceit or vanity. It isn't even a story of one person. It is a story of being used as pawns, a story of unrequited love and pain, of the corruption of innocence, of losing oneself. To tell Narcissus' story, we must begin with a woman who would come to love him most helplessly, the nymph Echo, or Icho in Greek. Echo lived on Mount Kithaeron, just west of Athens. She had the most mellifluous voice. When she talked, listeners were spellbound, and she could talk. Kithaeron, unfortunately, was also one of Zeus's favourite hunting grounds for a bit of extramarital whoopee. Zeus was king of the gods, the head of the Dodecatheon, the big feta of Olympus, if you will, and he was quite the lech. His wife, the queen of the gods, Hera, was always trying to catch him in the act. So Zeus made a pact with Echo. Whenever she spotted Hera around Kithaeron, she was to go up to her and use her gift, engage in conversation, have a little gossip, a little chat, just enough to give him time to make his escape. But Hera eventually discovered the deceit, and when she did, she was furious, especially at Echo for this lack of sisterhood. So Hera stripped her of precisely that compelling power of speech which Echo had used against her and as a shield for her husband's infidelity. Hera cursed her to never again be able to speak independently. Instead, she could just repeat the last thing someone said to her. Cast out from Kithaeron, Echo wanders the woods and canyons in the area. In nearby Thespia, meanwhile, the hunter Narcissus, or Narcissus, if you like it the Greek way, is coming of age, and he is one fine-looking young man. Women want him. Men, because this is ancient Greece, also want him. But he is the most merciless left swiper of all time. Nobody has the riz to tempt our boy. Now, we've all tasted rejection. It's not pleasant. We've all thought, I hope you meet someone who shows you what this feels like. But one rejected suitor, Arminius, takes this sentiment a bit far. He takes his own life, and with his dying breath, he calls on Nemesis, goddess of justice, to avenge him. Nemesis puts a hex on Narcissus, to fall in love with his own reflection as helplessly as those he has rejected fell for him. Unaware of the cosmic clouds gathering against him, Narcissus goes out, as he does regularly, to hunt. It is at this point that our two protagonists come together. Echo, meandering through the woods, at her lowest ebb, spies him and falls head over heels. Oh, how she longed to whisper to him sweetly, to make her soft entreaties, writes the poet Ovid in Metamorphosis. But Hera's malediction will not allow her to speak to him. She can't begin. What it does permit is to await his voice and to return it. She stealthily follows his steps, Ovid tells us, and the more she follows him, with more intense a flame does she burn, like sulphur on a torch. Finally, maybe sensing someone's eyes on him, Narcissus stops and calls out, "Is someone here?" "Here," Echo responds. "Why won't you come to me?" he asks. "Come to me," she says. Annoyed, thinking she is mocking him, Narcissus commands her, "Come now, let us be together." Be together, she reflects with joy as she rushes out into the clearing and runs to embrace him. But Narcissus is shocked. Who is this person? He spurns her, orders her to keep her hands to herself. As he runs away, he tells her, "I would sooner die than let you have me," only to hear the words, "Have me," come from her. Echo is crushed. But her obsession is so great that she keeps pursuing him, stalking him for days, with neither food nor water, wasting away. Ovid writes, she lies hidden in woods, covering her blushing face with green leaves, and sleeps in lonely caves. Her miserable body shrinks, her skin shrivels, her flesh evaporates. In the end, only her love for him and her echoing voice remain in every wood and canyon and cave. Narcissus is also exhausted by this pursuit. He comes across a clear, dark pool of water deep in the woods, from which no man or animal has ever drunk. And that is where his own curse ensnares him. It is the original, the literal thirst trap. As he leans over to take a drink, he sees his reflection for the very first time and falls instantly in love. He has no idea that he is looking at himself, and he cannot interpret the mixed signals he is receiving. When he talks, the lad in the pool silently moves his lips as if to mock him. When he smiles, the young man smiles too. He sees the same desire that engulfs him in his beloved's eyes. When he weeps, so does his sweetheart. So why then, every time he goes to touch the lad in the pool, he runs away, disappears? Echo knows what is happening, but there is nothing she can do. For days Narcissus cannot move. The world around him shrinks. He doesn't eat or drink or care. The image pulls him ever closer, Their noses almost touch. Moss grows on him. His muscles melt into the earth. His bones burn from an inner white fire. Creatures start to consume him. Seeds germinate through his skin as he keeps staring into the deep water. When he finally lays his head down, his last words are, "Cruel youth, farewell." And the last thing he hears is Echo whisper, "Farewell." Woodland spirits, sprites, and nature deities come to mourn him. Echo reverbs their lament. But there is nothing left of his beautiful body. All that remains is a bank of flowers, jolly little things, with pale petals, a yolk-yellow center, and an intoxicating scent, leaning over the edge, mirrored in the crystal water. After the break, I unpack the elements of the myth and speak to experts who help me decode them. What emerges is certainly not what I expected.
So good, so good, so good.
Just in and so good. Thousands of spring finds up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. And that means thousands of fresh reasons to rack.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
Vince, Calvin Klein, Rag & Bone?
Obsessed.
Why do we rack? For the hottest deals.
Save on Madewell, Kate Spade New York, Sam Edelman, Joe's, and more. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
The detail reveals a more complex and beautiful tale than even I knew when I started my research. The truth is that all of these stories, and this is something we will discover together again and again, they have a headline. Man falls in love with own reflection. And that headline lends itself to a multitude of narratives. It can be conscripted in the service of different moral messages. It is entirely plastic in the hands of the talented writer, psychiatrist, painter, filmmaker, or preacher. So most of the time, we're looking not at the real Narcissus, but his reflection in someone else's pool. We are hearing not the real Echo, but her reverberation around our cultural landscape. Testament to this is the fact that one of the overarching themes that emerges from the full tale is something that is rarely talked about in relation to the myth: how intricately related it is to nature. The setting is sylvan, full of woods, mountains, springs, and caves, undisturbed by humans. Echo is a nymph, a minor deity of nature. There are dozens of kinds of nymphs, specific to everything from the time of day or night, specific to different bodies of water, specific even to certain trees. Echo is an Oread, a mountain nymph. Narcissus is the son of the river Kiphisos, and the nymph Liriope, a naiad, a water spirit. The entire story takes place in nature, and its protagonists quite literally melt back into nature in the end. This connection between nature and divinity is no coincidence. It is a vital building block of all Greek mythology. I asked archaeologist Alexandra Andreou why this matters.
In hunter-gatherer societies, nature was not a separate part of life. Respect for nature was essential. This respect for nature was not simply about survival. It was embedded in cultural and spiritual practices. That means it became a core element of the way of life. For them, nature was not something to be conquered or ignored, but something to be revered and understood. In many of the prehistoric sites in Crete or Peloponnese, we can have just a tree or a standing megalith, and the ritual would evolve around that. This connection between the natural and the divine persisted.
As societies progressed to more permanent agrarian settlements and eventually even cities, this direct link may have faded, but its imprint remained, most clearly seen in the ubiquitous practice of the libation, the pouring of wine, olive oil, or blood into the soil to honour the gods. The divine explained the natural, but in a creative rather than superstitious way. The lyrical is always given priority over the literal, and the relationship was reciprocal. The natural also explained the divine. Soothsayers would consult the flight of birds, the shape of clouds, the way water moved, animal entrails. Athena's temples often provide great vistas, a commanding relationship to the sea for Poseidon. Holy groves are favoured by worshippers of Zeus. Apollo is often found near rocky springs. In fact, geologist Gregory Retalak has argued that even the soil of a site of worship was important. Demetra's temples were almost invariably built on fertile soil, while Hera on soil suitable for pastoral activities.
In ancient Greece, nature served as a profound source of inspiration for people. And it was. I think in the relationship they had with the natural environment in everyday life, nature was not just a backdrop, but an active participant in their stories, with sacred trees, flowers, or other elements serving as symbols and agents of divine will. This deeply embedded link between the natural world and the divine helped shape the mythology and religious practices of the ancient Greeks.
Yet, even though the setting of the story is natural, what sets Echo and Narcissus apart is that they are somehow unnatural. They are somehow other. She has been stripped of a core aspect of her allure, her uniquely beautiful voice. He is someone who is given beauty but refuses to share it. Both are trapped by their reflections of sound and image, respectively, trapped by an artificial reflection of the natural. This is a more obscure element of the myth, but one that has persisted in the visual arts, literature, and cinema. Herman Melville alludes to the Narcissus myth in Moby Dick, focusing on the idea that bodies of water have a magnetic effect. They call to us, invite us to plunge, that in them we see what Narcissus saw, what Melville describes as the ungraspable phantom of life. I spoke to cultural historian Debbie Chalice about Caravaggio's famous depiction of Narcissus.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Caravaggio Narcissus, because that leads you, when you look at it, it's so engrossing that you almost feel like you're falling into it. You sort of stand beneath it, looking up as it's displayed at the moment. And it's really compelling, and it's a very dark image, and you feel like you're falling into the pool with Narcissus. And there's so many depictions of him in the Renaissance. He's often depicted with the so-called happy inch, which is a slight erection. And it's implied that might be about himself. Certainly in one of them, he's on his own. And that's not seen as natural either, but slightly laughing at him too. The sort of story of Narcissus and Echo is associated with the painter, the art of the image, the idea of copying, and the idea of copying yourself. Some of the most famous examples of mimesis are self-portraits, particularly naturalistic self-portraits like those that Rembrandt does. But it's also when mirrors come in, and towards the end of that period, that are available to buy, that are good quality, and perspective and mirrors is much more understanding about the way the eye works, the way that you look at things, and the way you can be reflected. So Caravaggio had two big mirrors that he had in his studio when he died. Now, bearing in mind he was pretty much penniless when he died, that's quite an extravagant thing to have, is two large mirrors. And we know that he used them for painting this Narcissus, this pool. And mirrors aren't natural things. They're made and they're adapted by artists during this period, and they become ever more complex. So they become essential to artists. They become essential for reflection.
And so another little pattern seems to emerge. Think of Tennyson's The Lady of Shalott. Something terrible will happen if she looks directly outside the safety of her tower. She can only look through a mirror. It dulls reality. She lives with little joy or fear, Tennyson tells us. But it's a poor substitute, especially for affection. When she sees two lovers walk by, her reaction is, "I am half sick of shadows." And eventually seeing Sir Lancelot stirs passion that becomes her undoing. Think also of Perseus facing the Gorgon Medusa who can turn a man to stone with her gaze. He defeats her by polishing his shield and only looking at her through its reflection. What is safe for him, however, is her demise. She sees her own reflection and is petrified, not figuratively, but literally. So is maybe seeing the world through a mirror safer, but looking at oneself dangerous?
If you look at the natural worlds around the Caravaggio Narcissus, you've got this pool which is natural, but it's almost there in the darkness. You don't really see the nature, whereas in a lot of the depictions, you do see Narcissus within nature. And it's often a way of an artist showing their skill at depicting nature, actually, depicting reflection, because that's obviously an artistic skill. So there is something there about artificiality and the unnaturalness of falling in love with yourself. It's about artifice. There's also this idea of mimesis, as I mentioned, this idea of copying, especially with Renaissance art, of repetition of the image that Narcissus' myth is important to. And arguably, you get this again in the Surrealist movement, with the famous Salvador Dali image of Narcissus. And then you've also got a Max Ernst image of Echo, which is less well known, but it's from the year before. But that's a reflection, this interest in the myth. It's a reflection of what's going on. Artists are influenced by photography, questions of what is the nature of the real and what isn't real. That's the surrealism and industrialization and the busyness of modern life. So I think it is really interesting that myth is returned to. I think of the shiny skyscrapers that are being built for the first time. People see themselves in them. You're suddenly reflected back at yourselves all the time. So there is that connection between the sort of nature, mimesis, and artificiality that's in the myth.
This link between the artifice of mirrors and the loss of innocence is also one that persists in countless cultural references. The artifacts known as katoptra, or mirrors, usually made of polished bronze, but even earlier examples have been found made of obsidian, a sort of dark volcanic glass formed when lava cools, were often used for scrying, a form of divination, not only to predict events, but also in coming-of-age rituals. Coming face to face with oneself was seen as an important rite of passage from adolescence to adulthood.
The myth itself has been interpreted by scholars like Ingo Gildenhard as an allusion to such rituals of passage. Gildenhard suggests that the myth of Narcissus and Echo might represent a young man's confrontation with his own identity, particularly at the moment when he realizes his own self-image and the limits of his desires. In ancient Greece, scrying rituals were often linked to divine practices, especially those involving young boys. Scrying, which involves gazing into a reflective surface, such as water, polished metal, or even glass, was a common method of seeking guidance from the gods. These rituals were often associated with rites of passage, making important transitions in life.
Think of the trope of having to face a wicked version of oneself, from Dostoevsky's The Double to Luke Skywalker in the Dark Force Cave and Fight Club. The doppelganger as one's most dangerous foe and a metaphor for the darkness inside is rich territory, as is the adjacent genre of the antagonist who becomes the hero, who takes over the hero's qualities, appearance and life in order to replace them. I spoke to film critic Linda Marrick.
A variation of the doppelganger genre is the cuckoo, someone who attaches themselves to the protagonist and little by little takes over their identity, replaces reality with illusion. From stock thrillers like Single White Female and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, to more complex treatments like Saltburn and Parasite. One of my favourite examples is the 1999 adaptation of Patricia Highsmith's The Talented Mr. Ripley. In the film, Matt Damon plays Tom Ripley, a troubled young man who becomes obsessed with Jude Law's good-looking, rich playboy Dickie, begins to mirror him, mimic him, until he eventually takes over his identity. The story is almost a reversal of the Narcissus myth. Confident Dickie sees only what he wants in Tom, what he projects. Tom is the pool of water looking out, with self-loathing and envy, planning to pull Dickie in deeper. drown him so he can take his place in the real world.
And I've lied about who I am and where I am. Now no one will ever find me.
What do you mean lied about who you are?
I always thought it would be better to be a fake somebody than a real nobody.
Duality as a quality of wickedness and vortex that consumes innocence, especially through the use of a reflection, is something that has largely passed into modern culture as a weakness of women more than men. In most versions of Faust, the maiden's virtue, either Gretchen or Margarita's in Gounod's version here, is destroyed by a box full of jewels and a mirror. When she discovers it, she is full of joy. Oh, how I laugh to see myself looking so beautiful. Is it you? She asks her reflection. Is it really you, Margarita? Answer me. Is it really that easy to corrupt? Well, in a way, yes. And this is where Christian virtue in Faust becomes a proxy for a child's innocence in all those ancient rites of passage to adulthood. In a world with very few mirrors, there is purity to not knowing if one is attractive or not. You are simply you. The moment that spell is broken, there is no going back, especially if, like Marguerite, you are given jewels and fineries, tools of artifice that can make her even more attractive, supernaturally attractive. She can never again become unaware of her sexual allure. In fact, it can become an obsession. Take the stepmother in Snow White, an absolute extension of the Narcissus myth. The frame of her mirror swirls like a vortex, like a liquid pool, as she talks to it, and is answered. Not only is beauty not an absolute in this case, it is a competitive sport. But what you may not remember is that in the classic Disney version, Snow White herself takes on another aspect of this myth. She converses with her own echo from a well.
I'm wishing for the one I love to find me today.
Today!
Oh!
Hello.
Oh!
Did I frighten you?
In fact, the first time she ever sees the prince is via his reflection. And in that moment, just like the Lady of Shalott and Sir Lancelot, her life is turned upside down. There is no going back. From that moment of becoming aware, there is a world of carnal desire. Call it a corrupting effect, or call it coming of age. Once the cocoon bursts open, there is no going back to pupa. This interplay between innocence and wickedness is taken to its zenith by writer, philosopher, and poet of the Baroque period, as well as Hieronymites nun, Mexico's Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, nicknamed the 10th Muse. In her play, El Divino Narciso, the Divine Narcissus, Narcissus is Christ, and Echo is the devil. Echo uses the water to deceive Narcissus, presenting him with a false reflection, and it is only when he defeats the illusion that the water goes from carrier of sin to baptismal font. Echo has become a cipher of unnatural behavior in culture, sometimes the imposition of a stronger will on one's own, making the victim go against what comes naturally. I spoke to psychoanalyst Dr. Ruth Smith.
Women often lose their voice, like Echo did. The way in which a woman can talk about her lived experience and truly be heard is often filtered through who will allow and who will listen to her voice. And if women are seen less than, then their voices will be seen as less than. I work with people who are survivors of domestic abuse, and oftentimes their voices are ignored. They're ignored by society, they're ignored by sometimes family and friends, by police, the criminal justice system.
Usually, it is a man that robs a woman of her ability to speak her thoughts. In the classic 1950 Mankiewicz All About Eve, a film all about self-centeredness, projected image, and the corrupting effect of celebrity, listen to how Eve describes her encounter with poison pen critic Addison DeWitt.
I remember I had a tooth pulled once. They gave me some anesthetic. I don't remember the name. It affected me strangely. I found myself saying things I wasn't even thinking. As if my mind was someplace outside of my body and couldn't control what I did or said.
And you felt just like that talking to Addison?
In a way. You find yourself trying to say what you mean. But somehow the words change. They become his words. And suddenly you're not saying what you mean, but what he means.
In other cases, echoes are a sign of fragile mental health. Most mad scenes in opera include what is known as a cadenza, often a series of repetitions, a dialogue between the heroine and a flute, a call and response to a sound that others around her cannot hear. In some cases, an echo effect is deployed explicitly. In Giacomo Meyerbeer's Dinora, the eponymous peasant girl has lost her mind after losing her groom during a storm on her wedding day. We find her in a clearing in the woods at night, dancing with her shadow. She talks to it, and the echo responds, here employed to devastating effect by the great Maria Callas.
On the other hand, repetition can serve a really important purpose. It allows us to connect with other people. So in therapy, for example, we often repeat what the person has said to us, but more than that, we get below what they've said and we get to the meaning behind what they're trying to say in order for that person to feel truly heard and truly understood. And so in that way, an echo or a repetition, it can allow the building of empathy. And in fact, the role of empathy is absolutely core, actually, in development. When we're thinking about a narcissistic adult, one of the theories behind that is that perhaps their parenting lacked empathy when they were little. So there is a potential correlation between our ability to express empathy and give empathy and the impact that has upon relationships and child development. So echoing can actually, in its own way, be a antidote, might be too strong a word, but a counterbalance to narcissism.
This otherness and the myth's connection to unnatural obsessive desire is also why the Narcissus myth has so often been connected to queerness. Debbie unpacks one of the most complex examples.
Oscar Wilde was very influenced by Greek myths and poetry. Dorian Gray, the picture of Dorian Gray is most associated with the Narcissus myth, partly because, well, obviously there's a portrait in it, there's a mimesis, there's a portrait of Dorian Gray aging and becoming cruel, and this portrait is disgusting. Well, Dorian keeps his youth and is this beautiful boy forever. And there's obvious unnaturalness about that. People comment in the book that he doesn't seem to ever age. It's not necessarily that he's gay, it's more that he treats people badly. Sybil Vane obviously commits suicide, but there's other people that commit suicide around Dorian because of what he's made them do or entice them to do. So there's that going on as well. There's that kind of reflection of echo going on, that people can't live with him and love him. And this idea of self-love and putting that above everything else isn't, like I say, about necessarily being gay or queer. Because Basil, the artist who paints the original portrait, he's definitely gay. He's definitely interested in Dorian. And he's the one character with a moral compass. It's more the kind of not caring about people and treating them badly. And like Narcissus, all that Dorian can do is love himself. Even at the end, when he tries to reform, he realises he's doing it for selfish reasons. But there is an analogy. The analogy I would say to being queer at that time is that it's lonely and you can't be yourself in the public realm.
This is monstrous. It's beyond nature, beyond reason. What does it mean?
On the day you finished this painting, I made a wish. Perhaps you would call it a prayer. My wish was granted.
You told me you had destroyed my painting.
I was wrong. It has destroyed me.
Well, Oscar Wilde goes to Greece in 1874, and it completely influences his life. He's there with his tutor. He goes to Olympia, where the Germans are excavating. He goes to Delphi. He goes to all these beautiful sites and sees the sculptures in Greece. It's the only time he goes, but his poetry is then informed by the landscape, the nature, and he contrasts Greece and Northern Europe in one of his final works, De Profundis. It's kind of complicated what he says, because it's as much a work of kind of philosophy and theology, really. But he finishes with how he has to live in the shadows, not in the sun. He can never really be seen, but in Greece he felt he could be seen in the sunlight. And it has something natural about it that industrial society, particularly Northern Europe, doesn't. He suggests that we're out of touch with our own physicality, our own bodies. And it's a very Philhellenic, that is a sort of lover of Greek idea that you find yourself in the kind of Eastern Mediterranean. But at the same time, there is a truth in it that we don't live in the way that people used to, of course. And Wilde has a reputation for being artificial, camp almost, if you're going to be stereotypical. And he is, but he has a passion for nature and truth, which I think is really interesting. And this is partly what he talks about in De Profundis. He hides his passion for other human beings because he is cursed by his own need for physicality, for his own need of physical expression of love, by the fact that he does share bodies, the fact that he does love, and he's treated badly because of that, and he's punished by the state.
In fact, Wilde himself was parodied as a modern-day Narcissus in a caricature by Thomas Nast. He is drawn stretched out above a pool of water, gazing at his own reflection, holding a flower with the word notoriety inscribed on it. In the reflection, however, that word is replaced by the US dollar sign, the implication being that Wilde is a grifter who pursues controversy for money. Wilde, in fact, returned to the myth a couple of years later with a clever twist.
Wilde actually writes a prose poem about Narcissus from the perspective of the pool that Narcissus is looking into, which is such a wild thing to do, to take a completely different angle on the myth, on the idea of looking. And the pool says to these nymphs that ask him, well, what did Narcissus look like? How beautiful was he? And the pool says, I don't know. I was only looking at my own reflection in his eyes. So even the pool that Narcissus looks into doesn't really see Narcissus. It's most interested in looking at itself. So there's a kind of interest in not just self-love, but in looking at how we're looked at. You can't see yourself unless you have a mirror or a phone. Many people now don't even carry a mirror and do their makeup on the phone. All that reflection, that's what Wilde's kind of fascinated by, that kind of use of Greek myth to tell us something about ourselves.
And it is this version of the myth that made it into the prologue to Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, the first Brazilian edition of which has Caravaggio's Narcissus on the cover. It is precisely this reversal of the myth, this flip of perspective, that provides the most potent clue. While these characters try to look into nature, nature looks right back at them. These threads are brought together in the darkly magical Guillermo del Toro 2017 film The Shape of Water. Linda dives into the themes.
The Shape of Water challenges society's view of the other, both literally and metaphorically. The film's monster is actually the victim. People seen as normal are the monsters. Water is really important in every mythology. Its surface reflects the appearance of things, but the depths behind it is dangerous. But this is also a film about humans' relationship with nature. The main character, Eliza, chooses harmony with nature over dominion. The creature becomes a metaphor for marginalized groups. Eliza is a mute woman, chosen to work in the lab where the creature is imprisoned, because like Echo, who has no voice, she cannot reveal the secret. By helping the creature escape, aided by a gay man, Giles, and a black woman, Zelda, Eliza is also freed. She can finally find her voice.
Moons and Junes and Ferris wheels,
the dizzy dancing way that you feel as every fairy tale.
The poet A.E. Housman wrote, "Look not in my eyes for fear, they mirror true the sight I see, and there you find your face too clear, and love it and be lost like me." This is just as much about being looked at as it is about looking, just as much about the inability to express love as it is about being afraid of the response.
Don't give yourself away. I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take.
After the break, in the final part of our journey, I asked, is Narcissus in fact a narcissist? And if he is not, if the meaning we have assigned to him for millennia is wrong, what is his meaning? A single connection reverses everything I thought I knew about this.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-8444-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
So, knowing what we know, is it fair for Narcissus to have become the symbol of pride and conceit, of vanity and egotism? He is not a free agent in this story. He is cursed to fall in love with his own image. For what? For rejecting people who took it too hard? He doesn't even know it is his own image he is looking at. Narcissus is, in fact, an innocent. I asked psychoanalyst Dr. Ruth Smith about whether self-confidence and a refusal to give oneself away are signs of the pathology of narcissism.
It's an interesting question to ask whether Narcissus is actually a narcissist. People often have the idea of it as being what we would call narcissistic personality disorder. And it's really interesting because I find at the moment in my practice, a lot of people are coming to therapy and posing the question if they are a narcissist, to which I often reply, the fact that you're even asking that question suggests that you're not. And there are some times when narcissism is healthy. So we talk about maladaptive narcissism, which would be more like the narcissistic personality disorder, the sort of stereotypical view that we have of a narcissist. Whereas adaptive narcissism can be really helpful and actually a positive thing. For example, we can draw healthy boundaries in relationships. We can take pride in our achievements. We can have really good positive relationships with people. And so in that way, narcissism isn't always necessarily a negative thing. It's when it tips into the scale of being harmful to others that we become concerned. So to answer whether Narcissus is really a narcissist, I suppose the question is, what harm did he cause? Was it intentional? And was his motivation, for example, self-aggrandizement?
But if Narcissus has done nothing wrong, why is he punished? Two threads dangle from what we've talked about, enticingly loose. The first is the notion that divinity is part of nature, that the spiritual and the corporeal must exist in balance. The second is the executor of the sanction, Nemesis. Curses could originate from anyone with divine powers. Nemesis is not a generic justice deity. She's the bringer of balance, the corrector, the one who takes away when mortals are undeserving of what they've been given. Most of all, she's the punisher of hubris, a transgression against the divine, an offense to the gods. It's not that Narcissus refuses one person's affections. It's that he rejects all affection. His tale has parallels with that of Hippolytus, a beautiful youth, son of the hero Theseus, who has sworn himself to chastity. His stepmother, Phaedra, has fallen in love with him.
Hippolytus in the Euripides tragedy, and in the myth as well, doesn't return his stepmother Phaedra's affections, and she's very passionate about offering herself to him, and she kills herself and leaves a note saying that he's raped her. Now, Phaedra actually, surprisingly, is a very sympathetic character in the play, although you might not think that she would be. But the way he treats her, the way you see him treat and reject her is horrendous. So even though she then sets him up, you actually have mixed sympathies for him and for her. The thing about Echo, and to some extent Phaedra as well, that she's unusual because she is a woman who approaches the man or her beloved. It's certainly unusual in Ovid's Metamorphoses because most women are sort of running away, trying not to be raped, frankly. And she declares her love, but realises it's never going to be returned. And Euripides often writes about extremism, that you can't be too absolute about not doing something or doing something. And Hippolytus is repulsed by sex, he's repulsed by physical contact, by affection, and he's seen as odd by the kind of everyday characters which make up the chorus. They kind of represent the man in the street. He doesn't want to engage with the goddess of love, with Aphrodite. So they often counter his argument. He only has some of their sympathy. Chastity in the Greek world is not like that in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's not seen like that at all. So you have the same idea applied to Narcissus as well. It's not so much about self-love. In Hippolytus's case, it's more to do with an unnatural visceral disgust for touch and human pleasure. And there's an obsession about people who don't have sex or not having sex in the Greek world as well as having sex.
Phaedra's desire for her stepson might be depraved, but his rejection of all physical affection is inhuman. And so it is with Narcissus. He eschews the physical. He fails to understand that youth and beauty are gifts to be shared with generosity, not to be zealously guarded. That is why he is sentenced by Nemesis. There is nothing more unnatural, nothing more wasteful and offensive than the uncoupling of the physical from the spiritual, the refusal to explore pleasure.
The idea that we need to sort of develop our sensual self, and that's as important as developing our emotional selves, our intellectual selves, does come to this balance that we need harmony in all of these areas. And I wonder if the role that online pornography is having, younger people are developing an idea of their sensuality that is not based upon their own needs, but what they think they ought to want, to desire, to look like. And in this case, I'm not talking necessarily about sexuality, I'm talking about the expression of the sensual self.
And Echo's obsession with a man she cannot have is just as offensive. This is why they both waste away quite literally and are reabsorbed by nature. If they won't use their bodies will be taken back. Ben Jonson got it. At the top of the show you heard Slow, Slow, Fresh Found. It contains the lines, droop herbs and flowers, fall grief in showers, our beauties are not ours.
David Aronofsky's 2010 Black Swan is part psychological thriller, part body horror. Natalie Portman, who plays the lead, Nina, has described the film as an exploration of an artist's ego. The Narcissus symbolism is everywhere here. The ballet in rehearsal is Swan Lake. Nina is perfect for the fragile white swan, but lacks the physical strength for the dark version. Hundreds of shots take advantage of a multitude of mirrors in rehearsal spaces, ballet studios, and dressing rooms. It is a cautionary tale on the fact that obsession with image can change how we see ourselves, rarely for the better. That our reflection is a window through which the unreal can begin to change the real.
Free from preconceptions, If we yank the tale to the present day, the parallels become really quite striking. For what are Echo and Narcissus, if not people who exist primarily online, withdrawn from the physical world and melting into the virtual? What is Echo, if not someone on Twitter or Facebook who has lost the ability to express original thought, has lost her voice, and merely repeats, reposts, shares, amplifies others in an elaborately curated echo chamber? What is a smartphone, if not a piece of obsidian, robbing our teenagers of their childhood too soon and ever sooner? And what is that still reflective pond, if not Instagram or YouTube, where we project the filtered images of our perfect faces and perfect homes and perfect dinners and wait anxiously, breathlessly for validation to be mirrored back to us? 1,000 people thoughtlessly pressing the symbol of a heart can feel like love, but is it? If you're the world's richest man, you might even buy the pond, command it to show you precisely what you want. It pleases you, but it's not real. It feels like an embrace, but all the while the growing moss is swallowing you.
In Matt Spicer's 2017 satire, Ingrid Goes West, we are in a world of influencers, where everyone wants to be the main character. Ingrid, played by Aubrey Plaza, is a troubled young woman. To use the Trump lingo, she is a loser who becomes obsessed with Elizabeth Olsen's Instagram celebrity, Taylor Sloan. Ingrid wants the dream Instagram life, beautiful weekends in expensive Airbnbs, gorgeous friends, a rich partner, beautiful clothes. For Ingrid, Taylor is the ideal version of herself. Everything is framed, tinted, and filtered. But as she moves to LA and injects herself in Taylor's life, she discovers that she has fallen in love with an illusion. It asks the question, who is the parasite? The obsessive dysfunctional fan? Or the online grifter living off the dysfunction and obsession she creates?
I don't wish to demean our online spaces and relationships. They are a lifeline for so many people for whom the physical world is too tiring or noisy or overwhelming, too full of jagged edges. Those spaces and relationships were a lifeline to most of us during the pandemic. But during that same pandemic, we also found that they are not always enough. They are not a like-for-like replacement. Our bodies are soft, peculiar vessels. They need sunlight. Our ears need voices. Our legs need travel. And our skin needs touch. So what happens when the virtual, constructed you begins to dominate the real self? If you spend days, weeks, years posting photos of your gorgeously lit and carefully angled face, your eyes seductively looking back at you, the skin filtered to Dietrich perfection, what do you see when you look in the mirror first thing in the morning? Who looks back at you?
Whilst having relationships online can be an incredibly positive aspect of post-pandemic life in terms that people are able to connect with others from similar communities, we need balance. We need a balance between our online parasocial, our online relationships, and also our real life relationships. And I think it's also important to be aware of the fact that when people are posting online, they're often presenting a version of themselves that might be filtered, photographs might be altered, they're presenting the best version of themselves, their happiest day, their biggest success. If that's not counterbalanced with a real, authentic identity and sense of self, if one is living solely through their online persona, we can become disconnected from ourselves, who we are, what we want, what success looks like for us. And also that we are so busy living life as we think it ought to be, then we will lose connection with ourselves and potentially with those people who are in our real lives, because they might not recognise the person that we have become.
So many paintings of Narcissus involve a somehow twisted physicality. The body getting into contortions, facing one way, but the gaze towards the water, as if his fight-or-flight instinct has been engaged, but his eyes will not obey him. The feedback loop of endorphins, that pool's algorithm, is drawing him ever deeper.
The earliest reference to the myth of Narcissus is found in connection with Demeter. In the Homeric hymn to Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, Narcissus is depicted as a beautiful flower that is irresistible. The flower itself is described with instinctive colors and a captivating scent, which entices Persephone to touch it. This act sets in motion the appearance of Hades from the underworld, who then takes Persephone to his chthonic kingdom. The flower of Narcissus becomes a symbol of the intertwining of nature and fate, with nature itself acting as a catalyst for the unfolding of divine events. So people have a connection to their environment. It's as though in understanding the world around them, its plants, animals, and landscapes, they were unlocking a deeper knowledge and wisdom that was critical to their survival.
I will answer you.
A number of times, humanity has tried to leave nature behind, to transcend it, to put it down like unwanted baggage. This is probably the most dangerous of those times. Every signal is seducing us to a life that exists in thought alone, telling us we can leave behind not only our natural environment, not only other people, but our own physical selves.
When you hear my love
Resist with all your might. Avert your gaze from that scrolling feed. Lift your eyes from that piece of obsidian. Find your voice. Go for a swim. Plant a seed in a pot. Catch some sun. Listen to the birds. Pet a dog. Meet a friend for a walk. Hold their hand. Meet a stranger for a shag. And do it with gusto. Hug your loved ones. Notice the world we share. The physical is sacred. To not connect to it is an affront. That is narcissism. Podyssey is an audio production by Cooler Heads, written and presented by Alex Andreou. A playlist of all the music in the episode, as well as links to the films and works of art mentioned, can be found in the show notes. Creative input, sage advice and expert contributions by the four best muses a man could ask for: Alexandra Angeltaki-Rö, Debbie Chalice, Linda Marrick, and Dr. Ruth Smith. Executive producers Naomi Smith and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelli. Alex Andreou's Podyssey is a collaboration with Soundstone Clothing.